Boulevard here, and before I get into the preamble, I just want to let you know that if you are only here for the matchup breakdown, there is a timestamp in the description below, so you can skip this preamble about me and just get straight into it. That's totally fine. For those of you that do want to hear the preamble, here's basically what's going on with me, just a little bit of an update on, Boulevard. So the casting's been picking up lately, which is phenomenal. It's great. I love it. I'm having a great time. I'm doing a lot, and I think it's really working out for me. I'm having a good time. If you're looking for more casts of me to find on YouTube, go over to youtube.com/shitjustworks. That is generally my co-caster at this point, and all of the VODs for our tournaments are going up on his YouTube channel, not mine, as he's the one handling the production side of things. So if you are just here to watch tournament casts, go ahead and check him out. As long as my name's out there, I don't really care whose channel the videos are on, as long as you guys can see them and have access to them. But I do want to start doing more consistent content. Maybe not daily content. I think I am a little bit too busy for that, but I'm definitely not so busy that I should only be putting out, the tournament tactician videos that I do every week, and sparingly, I'll put out a patch rundown or patch breakdown or review or something like that. But I do want to start doing something, and gameplay videos aren't really my thing. It's not, if I'm involved in an esport and I'm watching and I like a caster, gameplay videos aren't necessarily what I want to see out of them, especially for how much tournament content I do and analytical stuff that I do. I think gameplay is just not something that you guys really want to see out of me. It's not something I'm super interested in doing, which means that daily uploads are probably quite some ways off for me, but I do at least want to get 3 or 4 videos out there in a week. I think that's a very reasonable goal to have, especially, my weekends are taken up by casting, so maybe 3, maybe 4. We'll see what I can do. But I do want to start doing more of these matchup breakdown videos. I think that is something that I would be interested to see out of a caster or someone with a lot of tournament experience. So what I'm going to be doing throughout these is I'm going to show you 2 games. One where the matchup plays out as expected. If I say this is a counter matchup, for example, this video is Braum Swain versus Karma Ezreal. Braum Swain is considered to be a counter to Karma Ezreal. So I have a video from Jamfest number 7 that I'll get into in a little second here. I'll tell you the preambles and the names and the players and where it's from and stuff like that. But essentially the first game is going to be how the matchup is expected to play out, and the second game will be how the unfavored deck can win. And all of the footage that I'm going to be pulling is from tournaments. It might not always be from top cuts, just because, we're limited in the people that we spectate. I think for Jamfest 7, we ran with Topher throughout the entire thing, so we didn't necessarily get to see too much of the Braum Swain versus the Karma Ezreal throughout top cut, but, you're going to get 2 games, one to show you how the matchup should play out, and then one to show you how the unfavored deck can win. And I think that's something that's a little bit more interesting and engaging, and can really help you guys take your tournament lineups to the next level, and really help you guys top, because that's what I want to do. I want to help you guys top tournaments. I want to help you find success in something like that, and I want to entertain you at the same time. So we'll see how this goes, but this is kind of the weekly content that I'm looking to do for the foreseeable future. So let's get into the review and enjoy. Okay, so this is from Jamfest number 7, Ian Agera versus Coronel. This is the Swiss rounds. We have Ian Agera on the Braum Swain versus Coronel on the Karma Ezreal. Their deck lists will be in the description below. I didn't want to go over the deck list pre-game, because I feel like, if you're watching something like this, you probably know what these decks look like, and if not, it'll be a little bit self-explanatory to either look at the deck list, or I'm going to constantly talk about how these decks line up over the course of the video, so it seemed redundant to do a deck review. Maybe that'll change in the future, but for now it didn't seem totally necessary. So, getting into game number 1 here, God, I'm still in casting mode. Game number 1, yeah. Oh, I mean, this is the first of 2 games that I'm going to show you, right? So this first game, we're going to see how the matchup should play out, how Braum Swain is a counter to the Karma Ezreal, and even we see a little bit of a slower start from the hand of Ian Agera. Something that I did kind of want to touch on is that typically, out of the more recent versions of Braum Swain, we're seeing Iceveil Archer, and Iceveil Archer pairs up with that Culling Strike beautifully in a lot of matchups, but actually the lack of Iceveil Archer is going to play out really well for Ian Agera here. It's not a card that's super useful in a matchup like this. Sure, it's aggressively statted, but typically it's just going to get cleaned up by a static shock, and we even see things kind of working out for Coronel so far. He gets that Eye of the Dragon down, which is kind of one of Karma Ezreal's good defensive tools, but there are 3 Culling Strike in the deck out of Ian Agera. Even here, the Ravenous Flock and the Sentry gets to take it out, and that's sort of where Sentry lines up in this matchup. Thermo Beam, this is actually really big. So Thermo Beam and Will of Ionia are really 2 of the big cards that the Karma Ezreal deck has to beat, Ian Agera. So the problem with using a Thermo Beam on something like this unit is that over here we see that, Braum, Swain, and Leviathan are all cards that demand either specifically that Thermogenic Beam or Will of Ionia. What's called Fury of the North kind of invalidates a lot of the removal otherwise, which is generally why I feel that Braum Swain is favored in a matchup. It's really like every card that falls into this category here, really the top end of the deck. And then, of course, you know, you have things like Noxian Fervor to do these cool combat tricks to dodge out your opponent's removal. You still have like the Crimson Disciple, which is a card that can typically be difficult for the Karma Ezreal to deal with, as they do cut down on copies of Get Excited. Here we see like a timely, you know, Braum picked up. We see the Swain over here as well. I understand not playing the Swain. You want to bank some spell mana, get Swain down next turn when you have Fury of the North available to you. And just things like these are just, this entire hand here actually from Untitled just like hard counters everything that Coronel wants to be doing. And here we see, like, even this is the second Thermo Beam, and that should be good for Coronel, but he's throwing it out onto pretty low-value targets. And it feels like he kind of has to, right? Like, otherwise you're going to get tempoed out. This Braum is going to take over the game. And Braum, while it's typically not something that's going to level up in a matchup like this, it is something with the buffs that presents this mighty Poro. And that's something that's really hard for Karma Ezreal to deal with. These 3 health breakpoints that you can consistently get out are where this deck is going to struggle. We're not seeing as many Get Exciteds out of these players. Typically, we're seeing 1, maybe 2 copies. We're not seeing a whole lot of gotcha. It's just not particularly adept at dealing with these 3 health units, and then when you throw in 5 health units and 6 health units and 8 health units and +4s, that's why this is a good matchup for the Braum Swain. So here we see Untitled is a little bit wide on board because of the Braum from earlier. We're going to see another Braum come down, and these mighty Poros are just difficult for Karma Ezreal to deal with en masse. You know, as long as there's a singular threat coming down, Thermo Beams, Will of Ionias, they're going to take care of it. Will of Ionia onto Braum doesn't feel super great just because it's not the most mana efficient play, and there are a lot of mana efficient plays that you can get out of Will of Ionia in this matchup. Swain being 5, you know, Leviathan being 8. And here, you know, Coronel's low on mana. We're going to see a Mystic Shot finish off the Braum, but getting the Braum off the board, it's already gotten the initial value. And that's the big thing about the Braum change that affects this matchup is the initial value that it gets. You don't need Braum to stick around. Braum's probably not going to evolve in this matchup. And now we see that Untitled is very wide, and this is something that's relatively easy to do against a deck like this because you have so many 3 health units available to you. We're going to see Coronel fire off a Static Shock. That's going to clean up these, and this is a very appealing Static Shock. You know, like this is, I feel like you have to go for the Static Shock. And with 7 mana, you're trying to commit your mana before the Leviathan turn, but now Untitled is free to play a Swain. And getting the Swain down before the Leviathan, you know, it feels absolutely amazing. Now, there's almost no way that Coronel is going to have enough mana going into turn 8 to actually deal with the Leviathan and the Swain. You know, it would take like double Will of Ionia, and that's about as good as you have to hope for, but we've already seen 2 Thermo Beams come out. If we see 2 more Will of Ionia, that means suddenly Coronel is down to 2 cards that really deal with this deck. He's pretty far off of winning the game. He's already down to 10 HP. You know, we're wide on board. We don't even have to play this pre-combat, and the attacks get to come. This is like one of the priority sequences that people don't really think about, is like, I get to throw out my attacks, and now you have to respond with your mana, and that means you're not going to have the mana for the Leviathan. Like, Will of Ionia gets fired off here. As I said, if we see 2 Will of Ionia, that's really, Coronel's really, like, the only way that he can even hope to stay in the game, let alone win the game. And even now, like, we see a little bit more damage push through. You're down to 6. If a Leviathan sticks from here on out, the game is over. And with only 2 Will of Ionia and 1 Thermogenic Beam available to you again, then, you know, you're not going to have the mana to survive these Leviathans. We see the Shadow Assassin come out because he doesn't have any other plays. It's kind of unreasonable to him. There are really only 3 outs left in the entire deck for this Leviathan. Only 2 were available at the time because Thermo Beam wouldn't get it done on that turn as he only had 4 mana. So the Leviathan gets to stick. You're down to 3 HP. And this is a situation where you really can't come back. We're not seeing... Well, actually, we are starting to see a little bit more health potions out of the Karma Ezreal, but I don't think that particularly matters in this specific scenario or even a matchup like this. Like, you need to answer this Leviathan. You have 10 mana available to do it, but you also need to answer the next Leviathan, which means that it would take, you know, 2 Will of Ionias, which is extremely unreasonable for the Karma Ezreal to have, and that's really the narrow space that it exists in. And I know I kind of repeat myself because this matchup it does feel a little cut and dry, you know. High health units, and an abundance of them, demand Will of Ionia and Thermo Beam. It's unreasonable for the player to find that many copies of Thermo Beam and Will of Ionia, and therefore the matchup is Braum Swain favored. It's obviously a little bit more complex than that, but surface level, that's what we're getting down to. And so one of the reasons that I have the gameplay going on in the background, first of all, for, you know, entertainment purposes, so that you can actually see this stuff in action, but also because, you know, you get to see the game play out yourself. So that's how Braum Swain beats Karma Ezreal. Okay, so this is going to be X Yotsuba versus Winding God from Duels of Runeterra 12 top 8, and this is the matchup where we're going to see how the Karma Ezreal can actually pick up a win in one of its most unfavored matchups. I don't really want to like spoil anything. The whole point is to kind of show you, not tell you. Otherwise, I would just do a video of this talking at the camera. So I'm kind of going to hold off until these scenarios actually start to come up. But I am going to say that the one thing that seems to be the most important is actually getting a leveled up Karma to stick. Ezreal is not as important in a matchup like this. You can't really afford to try and go for the fast Ezreal, as that's not something that's going to work out, as Yotsuba, of course, you know, playing a pretty standard Braum Swain list, is running the full 3 copies of Culling Strike because of how that pairs with the Iceveil Archer. A couple of other key differences between Yotsuba's list and the one that we saw a little bit earlier on is out of, I believe it was Ian Nagara. It's either Ian Nagara or Kernel. One of them was playing the Braum Swain. Anyway, they were playing Omen Hawk and Avarosan Sentry. Yotsuba is playing the Avarosan Marksman, or not Marksman, Jesus, Iceveil Archer, sorry. Iceveil Archer is not going to play super well in a matchup like this. It does give you opportunities to take the very limited number of fearsome blockers off the table, but overall you're not going to get as much value out of that Iceveil Archer Calling Strike combo unless your opponent goes for a greedy on 6 Karma, but you know, you have plenty of removal for something like that between the Death Sand into Ravenous Flock, Noxian Fervor specifically, just beating it up. You know, there's a couple of things that you have. And here we see Yotsuba even start off with the Crimson Disciple, which is going to, you know, force the Chem Punk out of Winding God. You do need to kind of meet these 3 attack breakpoints a lot in this matchup, both to contest the Crimson Disciple, but also to contest the Swain and not let your opponent get through an attack with something like that. I had mentioned in the previous matchup that Will of Ionia and Thermogenic Beam are sort of the 2 main answers that you're looking for. Concussive Palm does have its use in a game like this. You're really just kind of trying to stall out until you can get out that Karma Ezreal combo. The leveled Karma is a little bit harder for Yotsuba to remove. It takes Noxian Fervor off the table. Generally, you're not going to find yourself in a situation where you can stick the Karma and let it sit for a while. You're just going to have to kind of save it to 10. If you have 2 Karmas, like we do see out of Winding God here, you can kind of throw one down, but you're probably going to have to end up throwing it away as a blocker for the Swain. And that's where Winding God finds an advantage in this very narrow scenario, is he actually got a Key Guardian off onto one of his Karmas a little bit earlier on, and we'll see that come up a little bit later. So, of course, the Ezreal not going to live here. We are going to see the Calling Strike fired off. Winding God, understanding that this probably isn't worth the deny, and that's something that will actually come up later, so maybe it's a consideration. This is one of those things where it's like, I'm not sure if that's how you play the matchup, or if this is just specific to this one, you know, particular game, but, you know, not using the deny to protect the Ezreal, understanding that you are just kind of trying to bait a Calling Strike out of your opponent so that they have less Calling Strikes for this Iceveil Archer combo is something. So we see the Iceveil Archer come out. This is important because it means that the Chump Wump can no longer block the Swain, and as we had mentioned earlier, Winding God has a very limited amount of fearsome blockers. So this is where the Key Guardian onto the Karma plays in massively, and this is something that is a little atypical of sort of your standard Karma Ezreal versus Braum Swain matchup. This is a very specific scenario that's not going to come up very often. Normally we would have to see this Karma sort of block the Swain, as ticking your Swain towards 1/3 of the level up is something that's big. You know, dealing that extra 3 damage is just 1/4 of the Swain level, and Swain typically doesn't level in a matchup like this unless you can get off Noxian Fervors, which is going to be half of Swain's level. Oopsie. Then you're really not going to see him actually level up something like this, because there are so few units coming out of Winding God. We're not seeing as much damage-based stuff, and it's really just a race. Can Yotsuba stick these Leviathans, or can he not? As we see, there are no answers in Winding God's hand for them. No Will of Ionias, no Thermogenic Beams, and Thermogenic Beam even gets a little bit scary as an answer if, you know, Yotsuba does still have down this Swain, because then suddenly you're committing... You know, it's hard. You're not going to have a 3-mana answer to the Swain, which means you're committing 11 mana to kill this Leviathan, and then Swain's still on the table. You're down a Thermogenic Beam. You could find a Thermogenic Beam for the Swain next turn, but then another Leviathan comes down. Things get really awkward, which is why this is such a good matchup for the Braum Swain. You know, you get into these later game scenarios. This isn't a card that you can deal with easily. This isn't a card that you can deal with easily. And one of the things that actually does play against Yotsuba is we don't see a Braum come out of him, I believe, pretty much at any point this game. And we saw how important Braum was in that last game between Kernel and Ian Nagara. Braum is just huge in this deck. It's so good for so many reasons. Just Fury of the North being able to protect you from these spells, keep those Braums alive when your opponent is going to have to constantly throw multiple spells at them anyway. And thanks to that new buff to the Braum with, you know, getting that Mighty Poro on hit on the first instance of damage onto your Braum means that multiple instances of damage are not the way to remove them anymore. And this is where we start to see what it takes for the Karma Ezreal to win a matchup like this. We're going to see Winding God consistently just top deck answer after answer. Like we see the Static Shock come down here. Yotsuba's just kind of debating this, you know, It's Fury of the North. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. So here we see the Will of Ionia picked up off the Static Shock, and this is, you know, right on time going into turn 8. So now the game's sort of, like, Yotsuba's kind of limited in his plays from here on out. You can either try to stun this Karma and kill it with the Ravenous Flock, or you can just try to get down Leviathan. Just kind of jamming out Leviathans, making your opponent have answer after answer. This plays out really well when you have multiple Leviathans. And even here, Yotsuba's not going to feel too bad about this first Will of Ionia. You kind of expect the first Leviathan to get answered. You know, Winding God doesn't have a backup answer. And so far, this is all it's taken for Yotsuba to kind of be out of this one. On turn 5, we saw a concussive palm out of the Swain. On turn 7, we saw a barriered up Karma. Now we're on turn 9. And all of a sudden, trying to jam a Leviathan doesn't feel as good because you have, you know, double Ravenous Flock. You have so much removal in your hand, and your opponent leveling Karma is one of the ways that they win this matchup. So suddenly, all the, you know, like, rather than jam down another Leviathan, it does feel a lot more enticing to try and kill this opponent's Karma, especially since you picked up the Noxian Fervor. You know, this is the last turn that it's going to be at that 3 HP instead of that 4 HP, so you might as well go for this now. Because once the leveled Karma comes out, and the reason that I keep saying the leveled Karma is so important is because it opens up so many more answers onto these high health units that typically only have the Will of Ionia and the Thermogenic Beam as answers. You know, Mystic Shot opens up as a much more important and impactful sort of answer to things like a damaged Swain. 2 Mystic Shot take out a Leviathan. Get Excited itself takes out a non-leveled Swain, and as we had mentioned, it's kind of hard to level Swain in a matchup like this. And here, Winding God, this is something that the Karma Ezreal players need to keep in mind as well. Just deny the stun. You know, there's so many, you know that your opponent has Ravenous Flock. I had mentioned earlier that denying the Ravenous Flock feels extremely mana inefficient. If you think of this as a 3 mana stun, not only does it already feel more efficient, but it takes off the instance of multiple Ravenous Flocks. So all of a sudden, these Ravenous Flocks out of Yotsuba just aren't doing anything anymore. We're even going to see like Noxian Fervor fired off, just eat that second deny. And, you know, it does feel bad that, you know, you went for this removal onto the Karma and it didn't work out. But this is sort of where the denies get the value in this matchup, is just playing Protect the Karma. So that's why we didn't see this fired off earlier on the Ezreal. Don't protect the Ezreal, protect the Karma. Because Karma's harder to kill. Ezreal can die to so many things in this deck. And then because you're playing Protect the Karma, you're going to keep this Karma out for so long, you know, you're going to draw these answers. This Mystic Shot, Static Shock will actually take out the Swain once the Karma is leveled. So that's really cool. And then you just find Ezreal at literally any point in the game from here on out, and you're going to be fine. So we see kind of a complex stack, you know, going for all these things. We're going to see now Deny come out onto the Noxian Fervor. And this leaves Yotsuba with a really weak hand when all is said and done. Without the Noxian Fervor going off, without this Arachnoid Sentry going off, these Ravenous Flocks are going to be really difficult to get off. And because Swain is so far from being leveled, we're actually going to get to see Winding God play a little risky with his life total here and actually just not block at all with this Karma, let the Swain attack through. It's still not going to level it. And you can kind of generally take one Swain attack. Once you take more than that, then you're in trouble. But because Winding God has done such a good job of holding on to his life total thus far, he does get rewarded, gets to take this massive hit, fall down to 4. Because we saw the thing fired off, you know, it's a little bit scary. Falling down to 3 is a little bit scary in this matchup, just because then you do put yourself not only in the position to lose to Noxian Fervor, but anytime a Leviathan slips through the cracks, you suddenly just lose the game, whereas typically it's bad for you, but you can find an answer on the following turn. In this instant, you would just lose, and I think one of the reasons that Winding God is so okay with letting this through is because he has this health potion, and Karma's about to level next turn, so he's basically at 10 HP, which is great. So even if he had fallen to 3, I think he'd be fine because he has the health potion. If you're not running health potion, it's still absolutely fine to go down to 4 HP, but you really don't want to fall lower than that. It's so hard to consistently answer the Leviathans. As I had mentioned, there's really not a lot of answers, and even if you do have the Karma leveled, you do still have to string together multiple cards to actually get it done. And one of the other big things is that now the Thermo Beams don't have to fire off for 8 mana. They can fire... Oh. Let me just remake that. Jesus. Oh my god. Okay, so now the Thermo Beams don't have to fire off for 8 mana. They can fire off for 4 mana, and because Karma's going to double that, you're still dealing the 8 damage. So this is, you know, you suddenly have more mana to play with on your turn, which is going to help you actually start to clean up the Swain Leviathan combo instead of just answering one at a time. So once Karma levels, suddenly you're in the driver's seat because your removal just lines up so much more efficiently. And that's really the space that Karma Ezreal has to play in, is you play more towards the Karma win condition. And that feels a little bit weird because I think it's been quite some time before we actually saw a matchup where you did play for the Karma win condition. And this is important to recognize as well, going for the Will of Ionia rather than the double Mystic Shot, because your opponent, one, still has Fury of the North mana, but two, because you know that if you do this, your opponent has to recommit the 8 mana on the following turn, and attacking your opponent's mana is a really important skill set to have in TCGs. It's a little bit more complicated than I'm willing to explain in a video like this, but I mean, like, it's something that you'll pick up along the way, just like understanding what you can force your opponent to do on the following turn and then force their mana out, and just kind of keeping track of what they can and can't do over the course of the next couple of turns is sort of an advanced skill set. I don't know if I've seen anybody touch on it in Legends of Runeterra, but I think it's been talked about in previous card games. I don't know. I've actually, now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever seen any content like revolving around like attacking your opponent's mana pool, but I think that when I say that, a lot of people know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so now that like the leveled Karma is out, the Swain has only been able to hit face one time. Leviathans still aren't sticking. Yotsuba for the last couple of turns has had no choice but to either fire off Leviathans or try to kill the Karma. You know, now that the Karma's not dying, these Ravenous Flocks just look really awkward. You know, all of a sudden double Mystic Shot is taking this out, even if we do see the Fury of the North, and there's still a couple of options that you have, mostly due to the Karma's Inside of Ages. And of course, Rummage is another very important tool for the leveled Karma. You know, just 1 mana, draw 4 cards is pretty good. Here we see, you know, multiple Thermogenic Beams coming out, as well as Chomp Wump and Get Excited. And at this point, there's nothing that Yatsu is going to be able to do. You know, he's kind of expended on resources. You're just stuck in this situation where you have to run out Leviathans. And while that feels like a weird position to be in, where it's like, oh, I don't have a choice, I'm just running out Leviathans, there's really not a lot of answers to just continuously running out Leviathans. And here we saw, you know, Winding God didn't even have these answers readily available to him. He had to kind of top deck them over the course of a couple of turns. We saw a very timely top deck on Will of Ionia, another very timely top deck on Will of Ionia, this double Mystic Shot picked up. But basically, there's nothing that Yatsu is going to be able to do, especially because we did see like this Chempunk Pickpocket picked up. Does mean that, you know, you've got that Fearsome blocker for the Swain. Now this gets to take it out as well. And with only 14 cards left in deck, you know, he's got 2 Ezreal still in there, so we got about a 1 in 7 chance of ever finding Ezreal. We just saw 2 more cards drawn, which means we're down to 1/6 of our deck is Ezreal. And like now that Yatsuba's got his board cleared, running out the Leviathan doesn't feel nearly as impactful. And because Swain is so far from being leveled, the Swain doesn't feel as impactful. Even if you do get out the Swain Leviathan combo at a point like this, you know, we're probably just going to see like 1 Thermogenic Beam per turn. And this is really where the game has run away from Yotsuba. And there's really nothing he could have done about it. You know, Winding God just, the Key Guardian onto the Karma was really like the difference maker in this matchup. In this particular game anyway, because, you know, he did have that second Karma in hand, but looking at how the mana has played out for him so far this game, it would have been really awkward for him to have to go and recommit 6 mana to something like that. We see Arachnoid Sentry finally picked up. Of course, we finally have this Ravenous Flock down onto the Karma, but at this point, it's way too late. We've already seen multiple, you know, at this point, it's way too late to get this done on the Karma. We've already seen, you know, 2 other Karmas picked up, as well as this Karma's gotten so much work done. You know, doubling up the Static Shock to kill the Swain, doubling up the Mystic Shot to kill the Leviathan, doubling up the Rummage to find more resources. And we're just kind of going to watch the game play out from here. We're going to skip around a little bit. As you can understand, it's kind of over at this point. There's nothing. Yeah, here we just see a Thermo Beam fired off, and this was what I was talking about. That was a 4 mana beam, so you're not even having to hold as much mana as an answer as you previously would. So this is sort of what it takes for the Karma Ezreal to win. It's like, get to a point where you can run out the Karma, which can be very difficult to do because your opponent has so many high health units. We didn't see any Will of Ionias or Thermogenic Beams throughout Winding God in sort of the early stages of the game. It wasn't until a little bit later on. I don't even think he saw one until the first Leviathan came out. But the Concussive Palm being able to hold on to it, throwing out these fearsome blockers for the Leviathan. And this is where, you know, kind of taking out Eye of the Dragon is playing in great for Winding God. Because Eye of the Dragon is not good in a matchup like this. It doesn't block Swain. It doesn't block Leviathan in a meaningful capacity. So Winding God gets a little bit rewarded for kind of cutting some of the dead cards in this matchup in particular out. I don't think we're going to see other players get away with that. You are going to have the Eye of the Dragons, which does make this matchup a little bit rougher, but that's kind of to be expected. I really wanted to highlight sort of what it takes for this Karma Ezreal deck to beat this deck, and as you can see, it's a lot. There are a lot of things that had to line up for Winding God in very particular circumstances, and that's, you know, also no Braum ever coming out of Yotsuba. That's a little bit more of a mana efficient play that would have been able to push a little bit of damage onto the Karma, open her up for the Ravenous Flock, and that's, you know, something that we just didn't see out of Yotsuba, unfortunately, and that's something that could have swung the tide of the matchup. So that's just like one more thing that has to go right for the Karma Ezreal player. So yeah, that was Karma Ezreal versus Braum Swain, X Yotsuba versus Winding God, you know, showing you the other side of the table, and then Ian Nagara versus Coronel, kind of showing you why the Braum Swain should be favored. And there are variations in the build that can give you a little bit of a favor in matchups. Like I had said, Ian Nagara was running the Avarosan Sentry and the Omen Hawk, whereas X Yotsuba went for the Iceveil Archer. And Iceveil Archer is not bad in this matchup because it does take the fearsome blockers off the table for the Swain to get through. It just didn't line up that way in this particular game. And you know, at the end of the day, no matchup is 100-0. That's very important to remember. No matchup is 100-0 here in Legends of Runeterra, or any card game really. RNG can always happen, and I want to consistently bring you guys these videos and highlight those spaces and how these matchups play out and what it actually takes for that 30% or 20% or 40% to happen. So if you guys like this, you know, let me know in the comments. I love positive feedback. It gives me that brain shot of dopamine that I so crave as a human being. So yeah, let me know what you guys thought, and I'll bring you more of these. My first video in a series is always a little all over the place, so this is going to be a little more streamlined and focused as we go on. But I appreciate you guys coming out and watching. Good luck in your tournaments.